Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to Advanced Cognitive Processes. I am Dr. Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur, and we have been talking about acquisition of language in the last lecture. We talked about how a child acquires the ability to distinguish between speech sounds and non-speech sounds and so many other sounds that are there, and gradually, and that basically is happening even before the child is born, so at -3 months of age in the last trimester of pregnancy. We also saw that children are born with an ability to do phonemic contrast, to do categorical perception, in the sense that they can identify and differentiate between particular phonemes. If you might remember that experiment I was talking about, a child was exposed to a series of phonemes, ba, 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 and then a different phoneme is inserted, da, and the child can really make that difference out. These were some of the building blocks for the child to start appreciating linguistic stimuli, to appreciating what language is all about. And you see children use these kind of cues in order to start understanding and start making sense of human language. One of the other challenges was to start understanding what words are, and you saw that there were at least 2 or 3 mechanisms that the child probably is using. Things like using stress patterns, which is the metric segmentation strategy. Things like using heightened prosodic features, which was basically there in isolated word reading or infant directed speech. And also a very important aspect was proposed later, which was about children using the statistical information in speech. Things like how do they use information about transitional probabilities of syllables and phonemes, and how do they make sense of words using that. So, this is what we have done till now. So, we know that a child can distinguish between speech sounds, that is human speech, and every other sounds that are there. We know that children can start segmenting words, and now we have to actually begin talking a little about other kinds of knowledge that are required for a child to acquire language. So, let us move to it. Today is this second lecture on acquisition of language, and let us begin talking a little bit about how does this child start making meaning. Language is not about only the kind of sounds there are, it's not really only about the form, it is basically, or it's not only about just segmenting and understanding that out of this particular speech stream this is the word or these are the different words. It is more emphatically about the fact that the child has to make a connection between the form of the word, that is the sound or how it looks. We are talking basically about very young children, so we are talking mostly about speech. So, the child has to make a connection between the sound of a particular thing and what it stands for. So, if I am saying apple, the sound of apple should be connected with this object called apple, and how is the child going to do that? To give you a bit of a an estimate of how fascinating this ability of making word meaning is, Paul Bloom said in his book called How Children Learn the Meaning of Words, and he says that if we stick to the more conservative estimate of around 60,000, it equals to about 10 new words that the child is learning up every day until the end of high school. Now, if the child is learning so many words, if the child is making so many words, and if you see initially there are no words till 10 months, 1.5 years, there are 1 years, there are very few words that the child knows, but after this 18 months there is something called a vocabulary spurt, and this vocabulary spurt basically is the indication that after this the vocabulary of the child increases exponentially. So, it takes the infant around up to 18 months to learn their first 50 words, which is just around the spurt, but after that, after they have passed this age of 18 months, their knowledge of words increases rapidly, it increases almost exponentially. And remember that this is not with any specific feedback, or it is not with any particular training or reinforcement or punishment that the child is being awarded. You cannot really teach children each and every specific word that they are going to speak. They sometimes come up with newer word, they construct their own words, they do a lot of hit and trial, trying this word out and looking at whether this is correct or not, and those kind of things. So, one of the things that we will have to do is we will have to understand that how is this happening, and obviously the whole learning account or the behaviorist account might be falling short. We'll discuss that in much more detail. Even in word acquisition, there are two views. There is the nativist view and there is a behaviorist view. We will shortly come to that, but just let me point out to what Chomsky was saying. If you remember, in one of the last lectures, he was talking about the poverty of stimulus argument. Now, what does poverty of stimulus argument mean? Suppose, and I give this example oftentimes in class, suppose there are two tribal people going with a foreign guest somewhere, and they are kind of walking across a jungle, and a rabbit passes by, and these two tribal people actually look at the rabbit and point out towards the rabbit and say gavagai, or they say some random syllable. Okay. Now, the fact is that this tourist foreigner gentleman who does not know their language, how is he supposed to make sense of whatever these people have said? Gavagai could mean that it is a rabbit. Gavagai could mean that it has fur, it has ears, it has a small tail or something. It could mean that the rabbit is learning, or it could possibly just mean that that is food. That's what we are going to eat in the evening, or something like that, or that's such a beautiful rabbit. So it is very difficult for children to be able to point to to deduct from this pointing out kind of mechanism. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail now. The thing is that if children are learning these words at such a rapid rate and in such a high degree of sophistication, you have to give them this aspect of that they have these surprising abilities of deduction. They are kind of looking at the patterns, deducing something, looking at the patterns, coming up with more information. That is something that these people are doing. So you have to kind of keep be mindful of that. So the just point in say solution does not really work. It probably might work for nouns and objects. Again, if you consistently point towards the apple and say apple, apple, and you kind of do it all the time, obviously the child will make that connection that this sound stands for this apple, and it will grasp it. Or the way we teach children, this is a cow, this is a bird, this is a dog or cat or something like this. So it might work for these concrete things as well, but you would know that children start talking in abstracts also very quickly. By 3-4 years of age, they can start talking about things like abstract nouns, thought, I feel like this, I want this, or this is good, this is bad, those kind of things. How do children make up these meanings? There is no concrete object right in front of them. They are not being able to make, they are not really given a physical index to make this connection from. So this is something that one has to wonder about. This is something which one really has to reason that how is this happening. So another hypothesis or another kind of proposal again was given, and this proposal is referred to as the genetically guided learning. Again, Pinker is the one who is proposing it. It again comes from the nativist stream of thought about language acquisition. So Pinker says that children, when they are born, they already are born with these innate categories. So they have a sense of what is a noun, they have a sense of what are verbs, and what they have to do is just kind of populate these categories with specific instances. So child knows that what are nouns, and gradually with experience he will start realizing, okay, this is also a noun, this is also a noun, this is also a noun. He will start populating this category. Similarly, that the child knows what is a verb, it is an action, it is something that is happening, and then he will kind of pick up that this is a word, this is a this is running is a verb, or sleeping is a verb, and those kind of things. So this is one hypothesis that has been offered to explain this, but there could be other ways as well. So there are other things like people have offered general learning mechanisms as a candidate. So the idea is that you will have tokens. You can have things like if you hear of a novel word, and if you hear of that word being used in a particular context, you can just retain information about that word. You retain what this particular word, suppose the word is koba, so you retain koba standing for a particular object in this world, and you kind of make this connection again and again. You use your memory, you go back, last time koba was used, it was used for this specific object. So that is something which the children might be using. And so this is again something that children might be referring to, or children might be utilizing to be able to make these connection between words and objects. Also, if you wonder a lot of times children might be just using a kind of a hit and trial or an approximation kind of a method to make word meanings. So what they might be doing is they are just kind of coming up with what is called a basic level term. So for example, if you tell them and if you remember the lectures on knowledge that I gave in this course, if you kind of go back and refer to them, I was talking about basic level terms, superordinate terms and subordinate terms. So a lot of times children might just be using a basic level term such as an animal and not really going towards either the superordinate category, that is a mammal, or the subordinate category, that is just a token, which is poodle. So children are kind of approximately all the time using these things, but again because this is a kind of a learning thing and this is a kind of a hit and trial thing, a lot of times you will see that children do make certain kinds of errors, and those errors can be rather funny errors. Things like children could use what is called overextension. Say for example, if you show a rabbit to a child and the child realizes that okay, this animal, it has fur, it has ears and stuff like that. At some point, any animal that the child will come across having fur, maybe the child will refer to it as bunny. The cat is also a bunny, the dog is also a bunny, the different other monkey is also a bunny, because all of them have fur. At least this is the common aspect that the child has deduced. This is again something that happens very commonly with children, and they need to be corrected, and they kind of pick it up and they discern the rule and they do it. Another way, another source of error that might be coming up with the children's learning of words is that sometimes they would also underextend. So what could happen is, suppose there is a child and the child looks out of the window and sees that my daddy comes out of a particular vehicle, and sometimes maybe the child is told that this is a car and this is what daddy uses to go to office. One of the things is that sometimes children can actually make really short and strong connections. So what they would do is they would refer to daddy's car as car, but other vehicles as as something else. So he will say this is the car because this is my daddy's car and I know this, but all the other things could be something else. So this is also something which children are probably utilizing, and again because I am talking of this as a very general kind of a learning mechanism, slightly memory aided kind of a learning mechanism. So this could be something that the children are using to grasp the sense of words. Okay, so you saw that there is this nativist approach, the genetically guided learning idea, and then there is this behaviorist kind of an approach, which is the approach which says that it is a little bit about how children are acquiring words gradually from their environment. Let's move on to some other kind of strategies as well. So there has to be, even if the child is following a learning mechanism, there has to be a strategy about this learning. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about these strategies. One of the very important strategies that the child will need to follow is the strategy of mutual exclusivity. Now, mutual exclusivity is basically that if there are two words, they might not have the same meaning, or say for example, because you start assuming a very simple world, you will kind of think that okay, no two words will have the same meaning. Obviously, the child grows up, learns more language and realizes that two words can have the same meaning as well. Children take some time to start appreciating things like synonyms. So if there are two words, gavagai and bliket or koba or something like that, and two or three words are spoken, children will make the sense that gavagai means something else. Let us say gavagai refers to A, bliket refers to B, and koba refers to C. They will not be able to appreciate at a very early age, or they will probably not use it as a strategy, because otherwise the child will never be sure of how words are connected to reference. So that is one. The other thing is that children also kind of have these kind of strategies. Say there is this thing of a principle of contrast. If again and again the two words are being used for the same object, if two words are referring to the same kind of object, they must be referring to different properties of this object. Suppose I am using gavagai and bliket again for the rabbit, on and off, on and off, on and off, and the child kind of is noticing that. Then the child will make a sense that okay, maybe gavagai stands for the head and the bliket stands for something else. So if two words are referring to the same object again and again, they must refer to different properties of an object. One could be probably that it is an animal, the other could be it is a very beautiful animal or a dangerous animal or something like that. So these are some of the strategies that the children might be using. Another thing that is again post hoc, you can see that there tends to be a noun bias towards learning of words. So you will see that most children acquire nouns much earlier than other kinds of words, and if you really take a step back and look at it, it is logical as well, because nouns are really easy to acquire, because more often than not the nouns are, or the concrete nouns are, the things that their child is seeing around him or her. So he sees that is a brother, is a sister, is a mother, is a father, or it's an apple, it's a banana, it's a mango. Those things are there to see, and that mapping is there to be made. So this is easier as compared to starting to talk about imaginary things, starting to talk about abstract concepts and stuff. So again, this is something that the child is making a connection of. Also, children use a lot of cognitive strategies to filter the kind of input they are receiving all the time, and that input could be things like they focus on children do focus on people's attention. If I am pointing out to an object, the child will actually be very mindful of the fact that if I am speaking something and if I am pointing out to a particular object, all of these things, because the child has to look at my attention and see what is exactly, there might be many things in the room, and even if I am pointing in a particular direction, there may be 2 or 3 objects there. What is the object that is actually the one I am referring to? So this is something that the child learns, because he learns to gauge your attention and gauge what you are talking to. This is something very important. Also, interestingly, children have a very good estimate of the speaker's general knowledge. You will see a lot of times children don't really believe, or children don't really blindly follow what their siblings would say. Say for example, they will have a sense of the reliability of the speaker. They will have a sense of this person knows this much, so I should kind of take this one on face value, or this person is generally reliable. Suppose if kids have a lot of make believe plays, a lot of times children will be able to, younger children who are acquiring language, they will have a sense of, okay, this is just make believe, this is what you have to believe, this is what you don't have to believe, and this person is very reliable. Every time he has told me something, it has been correct, so I'll believe it. Every time this younger guy has told me something, it's been correct sometimes, incorrect sometimes, so I'll not believe him. So all of these strategies put together are in some sense helping the child to make sense of the word, to make sense of how the child is going to acquire these things. So this is a little bit about how children are acquiring nouns. Now, nouns are not really the only classes of words that the children need to acquire. There are slightly more complex categories like verbs. How would the child, again if we refer back to Gavagai could also have meant that the rabbit is running, or it could have also meant that the rabbit is going somewhere. Those kind, how does the child make those connections? Okay, so interpreting verb meanings is slightly more difficult as compared to interpreting just noun associations. Okay, and there is also this concept of agent and patient when you are talking about verbs. So if I might say the duck blickets the cat, or I might say the cat blickets the duck. Now the idea is the same word is there, blickets, and agent and patient are interchanged in the 2 sentences. So for a child who's just beginning to learn, this might be slightly of a slightly difficult puzzle to solve. People have offered different strategies that the children might be using. One of them could be referred to as syntactic bootstrapping. Now, what is syntactic bootstrapping? Syntactic bootstrapping is basically that the syntactic characteristics of the utterances can be used for inference of meaning. Now, what is syntactic characteristics? What is the the structure of the sentence? Is it subject verb object, or is it subject object verb? So that you will know that the first thing is a subject, the second thing is an object, and beech mein there is the verb. These kind of things children will they obviously they pay a lot of attention to whatever language is spoken around them, and these are the things they can actually use to infer these detail. And if they have the sense of the structure of a sentence, again the nativists would believe that children do have the sense of the structure of a sentence, and they'll use that sense to parse the sentence into that these are nouns. Obviously agent and patient are generally nouns, and middle of them is a verb. So that is something that the child will kind of work out gradually and eventually. There could be examples like you show the child an action happening. So for example, you can say Sheila is sibbing. Can you see a sib? So the thing is, let us say Sheila is knitting or something, and you see a knit or something like that. So the child has to really make out, sibbing is happening, so cutting is happening. Cutting is what is the noun that does cutting? Can you see a scissor? These are the connections that the child has to make. So this is a scissor. Scissor is used for cutting. Again, hit and trial, a lot of experience goes in, and then the child starts making these connections. Also, when you talk about verbs and nouns, there are things like, there are some nouns that are countable nouns, cats and dogs and pencils and erasers, and there are some nouns that are mass nouns like porridge and milk, and I want some milk. You don't say I want 1 milk or 2 milk. These are also the things, these are also syntactical features of our language that the child gradually learns to understand and gradually acquires. But again, you will see that there are various processes that are really happening. Again, this is still we are talking about verbs. Another important aspect in verbs is the fact that you must understand that the fact is that there are different kinds of verbs or different ways in which verbs are used. Suppose I am talking about sleeping. So she slept on the bed is a transitive verb. Slept has been used as a transitive verb. Slept is coming with an object, or I could just say she slept. Okay, I am not really using the object here. So then this is an intransitive use of it. So similarly, the child will need to figure these things out. So sometimes as a parent or as a guardian, I could say she blinked, and then I have to say she blinked her. So then you will say, okay, blinked comes with an object all the time. And then when the child is discerning such patterns, the child will expect such patterns to persist. And whenever such patterns are kind of violated, obviously there is a good chance that the child might commit a mistake in understanding. So Yuan and Fisher, they did this experiment in around 2009, and they exposed children to similar sentences, she blinked her, these kind of things, and they were showing accompanying videos with these sentences. And they show that children, and they found out that children could use the information in the video to infer the correct meaning of verbs. So what do you get out of this? You kind of get that children are in some sense mapping the linguistic stimulus, whatever is being said, to the event that is happening. So if I am saying Ram is kicking Sham, and the child is saying that X is kicking somebody X. So the child is kind of also denoting that achha, this is Ram, this is Sham, and this act that happened is called kicking. So the child is paying attention to this and grasping this. So this is one. Also, so this act of this act that I just described, it is basically referred to as alignment. And what is alignment? I'll just describe it. I'll just read out a slightly more complex definition, but it's basically just this. Children are arriving at a structure sensitive interpretation. So Ram is kicking Sham, Ram is the actor, kicking is the verb, and Sham is the patient. So they arrive at such a representation by structurally aligning whatever sentence has been said with whatever event that is happening. So they are having a conceptual representation of the event. I am seeing X is beating up Y, and I am hearing that X is beating up Y. So I am kind of mapping these two things, the linguistic and the real thing, and that is what I am using to make this sense. Okay. So this is one of the very important features of children understanding verbs or children making this knowledge. Okay. So children are typically, again in more simpler terms, they are associating linguistic units of description to non-linguistic conceptual representation of events. So this is something that children are obviously doing. Also syntactic information, if they have a sense of, as I was saying, the structure of the sentence, they might that thing might also help children acquire the appreciation of verbs and stuff. Okay. So this is what we can talk about verbs. Now what have we talked about? We have talked about prosody, we have talked about segmentation of words using stress patterns and statistical information, transitional probabilities. We were trying to make sense of how children were making word meanings, nouns and verbs and other things. Now we have all the symbols. Now the child knows what a word means and stuff, what a noun means and what a verb means, and those things are there. What is the next thing? If you remember the way I had described language in the beginning of the week, I said language is symbols and rules. So symbols are there. Let us now start talking about the rules. How is the child acquiring grammar? How is the child making sense of grammar? Some of the observations I'd like to share. So, children about 2 years onwards begin crafting shorter sentences, those that have never been heard before. So, they start coming up with telegraphic speech, I want apple, something like that, telegraphic speech. And gradually these approximations, again, because the children, you will see 2, 3, 4-year-old children are most talkative because they are actually practicing. They are not really, really interested in talking so much, or probably they are, but the idea is this talking so much, this repeating of the sentences again and again is kind of leading to some approximation that is happening, and this approximation is getting closer and closer to adult language performance. So, children are kind of learning while doing, that's a common phrase nowadays. Now, how are children acquiring these skills to form grammatical phrases and sentences? How is that really happening? So, if you have to acquire grammar, you at least have to have 3 things. You have to have knowledge of word categories, whether it is a noun or a verb or an adjective. You also have to have some idea about morphology, how words are constructed. Is it a singular, is it a plural, or is it a past tense, is it a present tense, those kind of things. Also, the children have to have some sense of phrase structure. What is the correct structure? How are sentences, arranged in phrases? What words come together, what words don't? Those kind of things. So, again, there are 2 approaches, as I have been saying throughout. There is a nativist approach, which says there is an innate universal grammar that plays a central role in informing children about the 3 types of knowledge. And then there is the learning approach, which says children are acquiring this linguistic knowledge gradually, discerning patterns from semantic input, so from systematic input. Whatever they are hearing, they are trying to detect patterns in them, maybe statistical patterns, maybe prosodic patterns, maybe structure sensitive patterns, and what they are doing is they are using this knowledge to make sense of the word, to make sense of the rules that are operating in their language. So, let us try and see how these rules apply in these different scenarios. So, talking about word category knowledge now. Now, the nativist view to acquiring word category knowledge is such. So, Chomsky and Pinker and these other people say that knowledge of word category is innate. Children know what are nouns, what are verbs, etc., and they just have to populate these things using things like semantic bootstrapping. What is semantic bootstrapping? The child gradually figures out that there are things like objects and actions and actors and patients and those kind of things independent of any linguistic labels. They have this semantic thing, and they gradually kind of understand that this is an actor, this is generally in the front of the sentence, this is a patient, this is generally in the end of the sentence, this is what is happening from the actor to the patient, this is the event, this is coming in the middle. So, gradually the child is kind of getting to this knowledge. So, the child has to basically he has to map the concepts of the person who is doing something, the person who is getting receiving that thing, and the action to linguistic tokens. These are the one who does is an actor, the one who receives is a patient, and whatever happens is the verb. So, nouns and verbs, and this mapping has to happen. Pinker says that these semantic notions can be taken as evidence of the presence of grammatical entities in the input. Okay. So, because they have this innate sense of how language is, it might be that this is the sense that is helping them graft out nouns and verbs from sentences and eventually learn and master them. So, if I am writing the sentence, the baby ate the oatmeal. So, it is very easy, I am talking about the baby, which is the subject, ate is the verb, and oatmeal is the object. This is that, and I can have a longer sentence, baby ate the oatmeal with spoon and on a Friday or something like that. But the idea is there are these very simple structures, you can get a conceptual representation of it as you are seeing it, and then you try and map with the linguistic input, and that is pretty much what the children might be using. But wait for a second, there is another view to this. The another view says, the probabilistic learning view says that it's very difficult to imagine that the child's innate knowledge of word categories will be same as that of adults. We have this concept of nouns and verbs, etc., but it's very difficult in some sense, probably it's foolhardy to even imagine that the children might be doing it. So the probabilistic view kind of says that, and there are evidence for the fact that they are not using it like that, because they don't really use, nouns with generic substitutes. Say for example, they don't use dog and person in the same way, or they don't use fruit and banana in much the same way. These are types and tokens and those kind of things. Also, children's word categories or their word knowledge, what they are doing is based on concrete semantic properties, things that they are observing and seeing. So, a person does this or an animal behaves in that manner, rather than on abstract grammatical properties. They don't really deal with that this is a noun and it has to be used as such, or this is a verb, it has to be used as such. They will probably at one time just master one verb or one noun and then kind of move move ahead from that. So the probabilistic view in a nutshell basically says that the category structures that children develop reflect the kinds of language that the child is exposed to. So the child is being exposed to a particular kind of language wherein there are more nouns, less verbs, then the child will learn more nouns and less verbs. If the language is such that it has more verbs, less nouns, then the child will learn more verbs and less nouns. So the idea is, again, then you can rule out the whole concept of innateness, because if it were innate, it would be general to all species, all circumstances, etc. But a lot of literature, a lot of research shows that it is not like that. Children's learning of language is very closely tied to the exposure they are getting, even though it is not very clear reinforcement punishment paradigm, but there is some learning happening, something that the child is gaining from this environment. Another observation, if I'll share that with you, so acquiring morphological knowledge is a very important aspect to learning a knowledge. So the child has to start appreciating different forms of the same word, things like kick, kicks, kicked, kicking. The child has to know how these things have to be used. I talked about some time back this argument that children sometimes come up with incorrect constructions. They will say, I drank water today, or I drinked water today, those kind of things. So children gradually will need to figure these things out as well. Now, I am kind of moving in a different direction. How are children learning about morphology? How are they learning about singulars and plurals and past tense and present tense and actives and passives? One of the things that one of the observations that I would like to share with you is that for example, children will need to acquire some kind of morphological knowledge in order to start appreciating that there are different forms of the same kind of verb. Say for example, kicks, kicked, kicking are different forms of the same word, and children will need to start using this in some sense, start appreciating that a particular word can be used in a singular way, in a plural way, or in a past tense way, or in a present tense way. So that is something that the child has to really learn. Now, how is that the child is acquiring this? How is that the child is starting to acquire this tense knowledge or the past tense knowledge, or things like singulars and plurals and those kind of things? One of the solutions to this is that maybe children are just memorizing all the forms of all the verbs. Say for example, they are memorizing that what is the past tense form, what is the singular form, what is the plural form, those kind of things. But the idea is, if they are actually and they are just memorizing this stuff, the problem could be that it does not really explain that they come up with new verb forms, new word forms quite often. Okay, if they were just memorizing something, then either they will come up with the correct form or they will not be able to come up with anything at all. So the fact that they make errors and the fact that they spontaneously create different kind of word forms tells us that there is more to this than just memorizing. So what is that extra thing? The nativist solution to that extra thing is this concept of word and rules, which Pinker gave in around 2000. So he says that infants basically begin by categorizing words. So what they do is they take each verb as a separate category, and later they start link them. So first they would learn kick and kicking and kicked as 3 different words, and again with time they will try and link them together because they are talking about the same thing. So later what they are doing is they are developing an insight rule to link them, which is the common rule which says, okay, if you add ed to the present tense, it becomes the past tense. So then the child is coming up with the rule. Suddenly they are having this insight rule and they are kind of using it. However, this kind of an approach might lead to certain kinds of error called over regularization. So they might also start using these wrongly. So things like drink, drinked, or drink or think, thinked. So again, these kind of errors can come up. Following this, when they start making errors, in addition to whatever the insight rule was saying, they might start coming up with a list of exception verbs. So what they say is, the rule is you add ed, it makes a past tense, but these are exceptions. So think is thinks past tense is thought, drinks past tense is drank, sleeps past tense is slept. So they will kind of use these or store these different words as exception categories, and that's something that they might be using. The probabilistic contention to this solution is that it cannot be that children suddenly develop an insight rule. They must be doing a lot of hit and trial, a lot of data mining to actually be able to come up with these rules. So they say that children are only very gradually learning to mark out verbs using the regular past tense, and later they increase the use of regular tense. Okay, so regularization of past tense, regularization just means adding ed. Regularization of past tense verbs has been found to occur across some contexts more than some others. It does not occur across the board. Children get that some words you add ed, it makes past tense, and then they don't really apply to all the verbs. It's not been seen. So the idea is they are gradually using new rules, discerning new patterns, and then using and applying them, as compared to the insight rule that Pinker was talking about, that suddenly they start getting that rule and they start using that. Studies of child language development are completely plagued with sparse data problems. So one of the factors that kind of acts as an impediment in this kind of research is that there is not a lot of child language data available, and in that sense those kind of patterns are not reliably discernible. But again, that's a logistical problem. But so now we know that children have some sense of what the rules are, what the verbs are, and those kind of things. Children also now, till this point, they know words mean something, they know nouns and verbs and basic syntactical rules, but the main thing is still left. The main thing is to start speaking like an adult. How is that going to happen? I'll just give you a bit of a quote from Eve Clark, and this quote will probably help you appreciate that how fascinating or how complicated this is. If the child has to speak like adults, they will have to work out how to talk about agent versus patient, location versus instrument, beneficiary versus recipient, and they might also have to talk about marking grammatical relations, subject, object, plural, singular, those kind of things. And in that sense, it is very difficult. We are talking about them acquiring these rules. So in this sense, something that is very important to gain is the knowledge of phrase structure. How are particular words put together as phrases, and which will later be combined to form sentences, longer sentences, paragraphs, and those kind of things. So again, there is a nativist view about this. So the nativist view says that the basic knowledge that children need to start combining words into phrases and later sentences is present in latent form at the birth. Children know that subjects will either come before the verbs or after. So they have this basic sense. Infants will need to figure out the settings of the parameters, because you don't know which language family you are born into. So gradually, with experience, they kind of figure this out. Okay, I am born into this language family, and this is how I am going to use. Now this is the nativist view, and the nativist view kind of again puts forward another hypothesis, which is the continuity hypothesis. The continuity hypothesis, following from what I was just saying, says that phrase structure knowledge possessed by children very early on is almost equivalent to the phrase structure knowledge that adults possess or that adults manifest. Even in child, and the logic behind this is that even if you look in child utterances, their utterances also have a subject. They also have a noun, and they also have verb phrases and noun phrases and those kind of things. I want to eat apple. So there is a subject, there is a a verb, and there is a object there. So typically they are saying that it is happening in such a manner because this is exactly like what the adult language is, and to a sense you can say that maybe it is true, but then you are forced to see at errors. Children are, if this were true, how are the children kind of using making errors? Because if something is innate, if it is generally applicable across the board, you will not expect the children to make errors. So that also happens. So children also sometimes utter sentences like, or phrases like, I won't hold postman Pat. They are not, so the correct thing would be, I want to hold postman Pat, or something like. So they are kind of missing these links here. So it does it in that sense, it is a case against the fact that there might be, you know, such a continuity that we are talking about. So if not continuity, if not the nativist solution, what else? So there is a learning theory based solution. What is the learning theory based solution? It is that learning phrase structure results from the analysis of the input they are exposed to. So whatever they are hearing, you know, we talked about innately guided learning mechanism, more attention, more processing. So they are probably attending to whatever input that is there, and their phrase structure knowledge basically just mirrors the frequency with which sequences of words occur in their language environment. So if you see a particular parent is talking to the child in a particular manner, if children are living in a particular locality, this is what, you know, this is the kind of language they are exposed to, and their initial language or their initial knowledge about phrase structures will basically come from that aspect itself. So again, you don't really need an insight rule, or you don't really need a lot of latent native or innate knowledge. You just need to be good at processing whatever is coming on your you know, is coming in your ears, and that is what you will use to discern rules and verb categories and so on and so forth. So, and also there is evidence which says that children exposed to verbs like want without the preposition to make more errors of the kind want dance or want hold somebody, as compared to if they were exposed to things like want to dance, they would probably pick up that in a better way than you know, than not. So this is, and this approach, basically this kind of explanation lends itself to a slightly different concept of grammars that exists to the current one, and this set of grammars are referred to as usage based grammars. What are these usage based grammars? They are basically, see, Chomsky's concept of grammar is of a universal grammar. It's a concept of a grammar that is largely innate. It consists of a grammar that is biologically specified. All of that is good, all of that is really very functional and has been around for some time, but an alternative approach could be that children are basically, you know, acquiring what is called a usage based grammar. You know, they learn to use individual words, how individual verbs or individual words behave, and only gradually they kind of start making larger abstract classes. They know that this is a critical you know, concrete object, so this must be a noun. This is an abstract action happening, this must be a verb. This is happening gradually, slowly, and at a much later stage. Not like that there is an you know, innate aspect and that kind of dawns on children to give them insight rule and stuff. And an example in support of what I am saying is present in, say for example, children are very reluctant to change the structure of their utterances from what they begin learning with. So for example, if the child is into a habit of saying mommy drank as compared to mommy drank the milk, the child will find it very difficult to start using mommy drank the milk. The child will just say mommy drank, it will be milk, water, I mean that's not the question. So again, it seems slightly more logical at this point to say that the children might be learning a lot of this. Obviously learning is definitely aided by better memory, better attention and those kind of things, but that is pretty much what it looks like. So you know, coming to the end of this language acquisition part, it seems to be quite a journey. It seems we started from the fact that, you know, from -3 months of age, children are being able to distinguish speech sounds. They are able to do phonemic contrast, categorical perception, then they learn how to segment words, then they learn how to acquire meanings, nouns and verbs and so on and so forth. Then they have to have category knowledge, phrase structure knowledge and so many other things. So this is pretty much what the journey of acquisition of language is about. I hope in the 2 lectures you kind of could make sense of all of this, and that is all from me about language acquisition. We will meet in the next class to talk about something else. Thank you.